Today I'm here not just to share opinions, but to provide evidence-based advice drawn from my extensive research.
Dr. Atsushi Mizumoto.
Professor at the Graduate School of Foreign Language Education and Research in Kansai University, Japan.
Do you have any opinion on apps like Duolingo, for example?
It really depends on the person. From my own research on vocabulary strategies, I know that different people learn vocabulary in different ways.
I feel like this is a common sort of a recurring theme here. You're saying that there's no one best language learning strategy, but isn't there a faster and better way of learning vocabulary?
That's not how you learn another language.
All right, guys, Louis here, and today we have another interview. If you're into language learning, you're trying to learn a language or multiple languages, you're going to want to listen to this interview because we have Atsushi with us here. And Atsushi, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, your work, your research, and also try to convince people of why they should listen to your advice when it comes to language learning.
My name is Atsushi Mizumoto. I'm a professor of applied linguistics at Kansai University, Osaka, Japan. My research interests include corpus-based language learning and teaching, vocabulary acquisition and instruction, and language testing. My work has explored topics ranging from effective vocabulary learning strategies and sophisticated corpus linguistics techniques to innovative uses of AI in foreign language education. I've developed and validated practical tools for foreign language education, especially for learners and researchers in vocabulary learning and teaching fields. And today I'm here not just to share opinions, but to provide evidence-based advice drawn from my extensive research.
Nice, that's very nice. I just want to start with just a question about your research. So I think one part of your research focuses on a vocabulary, is that right? So would you say, this is a question I often ask people is, do you think vocabulary is the most important part of language learning as opposed to, say, grammar and pronunciation?
Yeah, definitely, yes. Because, without vocabulary, you cannot convey any meaning to others, right? And if you want to like travel somewhere, then the first thing you do is to remember some few words so that you can communicate with people in that country. So I think that shows how important vocabulary is.
Okay. And yeah, it's definitely been my experience. I mean, I've tried, learning some languages, some I have failed and some I've had more success with, but I found that you can do, you can learn all of the grammar that you want, but if you don't know the words, if you don't know the vocabulary, you're not going to understand. I mean, you're going to fail. So, and there's so much vocabulary to learn, which leads me to ask, so you've done research on effective ways of learning vocabulary. If you could give people like sort of the best vocabulary learning techniques, what would it be?
I would say that's a difficult question because as a researcher, I cannot say this is the most effective way because I know from my research, learners use different types of vocabulary learning strategies depending on their personality and depending on their experience and the purposes for learning. Yeah, and but the important thing is like the input and also the depth of processing. So processing information. If you want to focus on meaning, remembering the meaning of the word, then you could use some kind of like connecting the meaning with the sound and the form of the word.
You talked about depth of processing. What do you mean by that?
The more you processing information is more like deeper, then more likely you remember that information. So just trying to remember the meaning and the form and meaning matching is not really effective. Trying to like connect it with your experience or that the situation where the word is used or some kind of image in your mind, and also thinking about the same meaning of words like synonyms or antonyms meaning the opposite words. Yeah, and then all those kinds of techniques would be really effective to fix the meaning or like the the information of the word in your memory.
Okay, so it's not enough to just learn words and you see their sort of translation in your native language. You need to sort of link it with other things. I've actually made, like flashcard decks. So I have lots of flashcards for different languages. As a software developer, I made this, and I just want your opinion on this because to increase the depth of processing, what I did was on each flashcard. So each flashcard has a new word. So if you're learning, I don't know, Japanese, then, there's a word in Japanese and a translation in English. But there's also a number one, a mnemonic. So using
Yeah.
the keyword technique, I talked about this with Paul Nation. And there's also a what is called a word part analysis. I don't know if you know this. You break down the word into different parts. Do you think that these pieces of information are useful to better remember the vocabulary?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
But as I said, it all depends on the learners. If they want that information, then that's effective. And also manipulating that kind of information in their own, like ways would be more effective. Just be given by someone, like
Okay.
from the software or something like that. But, they try to think about their own ways to try to remember specific word with their
Okay.
own technique. And also in terms of vocabulary learning, pronunciation or the sound is very important. Like for Japanese, like you have like different types of kanji and hiragana, katakana, and those types, but they're not connected to sound. But
Hmm.
in English, the sound, the connection is very, very strong. So you should try to say the word yourself, and that will be really effective in the long term.
Talking more broadly about technology for language learning, do you have any opinion on, say, popular language learning apps like Duolingo, for example?
I think Duolingo is a good way, but it really depends on the person. Yeah, as I said. So, for example, Duolingo is great if you like practicing a little, every day, or if you enjoy learning by playing games. But some people might need clearer grammar explanations, and Duolingo might not be enough for them. So, and from my own research on vocabulary learning strategies, I know that different people learn vocabulary in different ways. And if your Duolingo works well for you, that's great. And you should definitely keep using it. But if you have never used it, you never know whether it suits you or not. So that's why trying it yourself is very important.
Right, I see. So I feel like this is a common sort of a recurring theme here. You're saying that essentially there's no one best language learning strategy. It's more about what fits you and just do that. But I just want to play the devil's advocate here. So, for example, I don't know, like if you want to build muscle, for example, you go to the gym and you lift weights, and there's no way around it really. You have to lift heavy weights. So no matter what your preferences are, you have to lift heavy weights, and that's really the only way. Isn't that the case in language learning too? Like, I mean, okay, you can do stuff that you'd like, but isn't there a faster and better way of learning vocabulary? Is it really important to use a technique that suits your personality?
That's not how you learn another language because the motivation matters and your personality matters. So you should think about yourself first. Are you a type of person who wants to hit the gym every day and then do some, like some kind of training? Then, repetition or some kind of cognitive rehearsal will be really important. But if you want to just have fun and, enjoy yourself, then, you should try another way, another.
Right, right. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, because there's so much to learn in a language, you have to use things that, you're gonna be consistent with, because otherwise, if you can't do it, then you're never gonna make it. There's so many words to learn in a language, it's not possible to just do whatever. I want to talk a little bit more about input. I mean, the importance of input, I suppose. I'm sure you're aware of Stephen Krashen. I mean, he's been a big influence in this field of linguistics. I think there are still people now on the internet, at least, that follow Stephen Krashen's advice, which is essentially if you want to learn a language, input is really all that matters. You can do flashcards and textbooks and so on, but I think if you ask Stephen Krashen, then he would say, these things are not really important. You should really just get input, just reading and listening, and then the output is just going to, you know, result automatically from the input. What do you think about this?
I think that's one approach,
Uh,
not the answer. Yeah, not the ultimate answer. Numerous studies suggest that using flashcards is indeed effective,
Okay.
And however, this again depends on the individual learner. So, for example, learners who prefer picking up vocabulary through conversations might find flashcards boring, and that's completely understandable. And there are also many successful language learners who have never used flashcards.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I've interviewed some of them. But so ultimately, the key is getting enough input. But if either it's from the conversation or the intensive explicit vocabulary flashcards.
Okay. I just want to get your opinion. If you had yourself to learn a new language, so let's say,
Yeah.
I don't know, is there a language that you want to learn in particular?
Korean.
Korean, okay. I mean, my understanding, I'm learning Japanese, and when I see Korean, the Korean language, I don't understand anything. People say they're somewhat close, but I don't know. I mean, I don't understand any Korean, even though I can speak
Yeah, yeah.
Japanese. Okay, so you're going to learn Korean, and you have to do it in 1 year. And let's say, for the sake of this experiment, you just quit your job and now you're just going to learn Korean in 1 year. And you have to design a language
Yes.
learning program. It's going to be your
Yeah.
full-time job, just learning Korean. Could you tell me a
Yeah.
little bit what the program would look like based on your understanding of the research in this field?
So from day one, I start using the language actively while also making sure I'm getting intensive input at the same time. So vocabulary and grammar are certainly important, but without a clear vision or the reason or goal for learning them, they lose their meaning. So this approach to getting enjoyable input and then using it immediately is common actually among polyglots who successfully learn multiple languages.
Okay.
And alongside that, I'd spend time intensively building explicit grammar and vocabulary knowledge to fill any gaps I notice. Yeah, many learners, especially those studying for tests, tend to forget that the real purpose of language learning is to
Yeah.
actually use the language.
Yeah.
So without sufficient input and opportunities to practice, explicit knowledge alone isn't very helpful. So you can clearly see this issue in traditional school settings, like in Japan, where students gain explicit knowledge from textbooks and vocabulary books, lists, and they encounter the language in real, meaningful context. And so as a result, students end up studying just for exams and never realizing how the language they are learning is actually used outside the classroom. So I thought if I had to design a 1 year intensive language program, like you said, for myself, I first focus heavily on real communication, speaking, writing, listening, and reading, in alignment with my learning goals. Then I systematically identify and address the gaps in my knowledge. Nowadays, AI can provide tremendous support for identifying and filling these gaps. So I would definitely incorporate AI-based tools into my learning program as well.
Right. I have some follow-up questions to this. So you said probably the most important aspect would be, first of all, actively sort of engaging with the language based on your needs. Could you expand a little bit on this? What does it mean? Like you're going to actually talk with Korean people?
Yeah. So my daughter is interested in K-pop, and she always listens to Korean, and then watching their interviews on YouTube, and
Okay.
then all of a sudden, like a few months ago, she started speaking Korean without any formal instruction at school,
Okay.
and then she can communicate with Korean people. And I thought like, wow, that's surprising because she never learned Korean at school, and she can now communicate with Korean people in Korean which she learned from YouTube and from from her K-pop stars.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, that's pretty amazing. And so that's one of the reasons why motivation is so important in language learning. Without such motivation, or it's impossible to reach that kind of fluency level. So I think so that what I've asked myself, what's the purpose of learning this language? Yeah, and then if I want to communicate with someone, then I'll just definitely need to practice speaking.
Even you mean even from day one? Because on day one you don't really know any Korean, but you would still try to talk with people?
As after you learn a few words, then you can use. So after learning a few words, then I try to communicate, use it in meaningful context, and then realize, oh, this is not how this word is used. And so that kind of experience is more important than just the learning from textbook. So I would just mix both at the same time. But the problem is I'm just too busy to 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 study Korean with my daughter. So yeah. So maybe making, as you said, like full-time commitment might be really important. I think that's one of the strategies you should think about. You think about the environment where you learn another language, and some people like to go to cafe and like do their flashcard apps. What kind of routine or the environment that you can focus on learning is very, very important.
Really? Okay, what do you mean the physical environment where you do the studying?
It's like part of regulating yourself, your learning, right? And then you first plan what to do, and then you do it, and then you review, if your plan was successful or not, and then you do something you plan something new, and then try to do it again and again, and that kind of cycle is called like self-regulation cycle, self-regulated learning. So in self-regulated learning, where you study is very important. And then successful learners think about where they can actually focus on their learning.
Yeah, and so you said, yeah, actively engaging with the language depending on your goal, that's number one. And then you also mentioned doing some deliberate learning with textbooks and probably flashcards to fill in the gaps. So how can you know exactly where the gaps are?
If you are active learner, you try to think, what went well and what went wrong. So in communication, you notice some kind of like communication breakdown, and then so to fill in the gap, you learn some vocabulary or the grammar, and then try to take action again. And then yeah, that kind of cycle is very important. And then also teacher or some kind of like help from maybe using like app study app might be effective, like giving advice to what to do, and some kind of tutoring will be effective too.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, I've definitely found this useful. I don't know if you know the website italki. I use
Yeah,
yeah, I use italki to, hire tutors to sort of correct me when I talk and stuff like that. I found it pretty useful and it's not very expensive. So there is one thing about specifically, if you're trying to speak with, say, Korean people from day one after learning a few words, I can see how this can be motivating and it sounds like a lot of
yeah,
fun. But at the same time, I'm a little bit worried about if I only know, a few words and I don't really know the grammar, I'm just going to say things that maybe are not correct. And I'm worried that if I do too much of this, do you think that, this not focusing enough on correctness, it's going to be a problem in the future? I'm going to learn things that are not correct?
yeah. That's why intensive or the explicit knowledge is very important. Yeah, and some people just fail to like focus on that aspect, and then they keeps making the same mistake again and again. And so that's why grammar and vocabulary are very important in learning another language, because without that sufficient enough knowledge about grammar and vocabulary, you cannot correct yourself, and then
Mhm.
you keep making the same mistakes. So yeah, if you don't want to get in the trap like that, and then so you should learn explicitly if you want to reach a higher level in another language, and then maybe communicate with others more efficiently, effectively, and without any like communication breakdown. Then you should focus on explicitly learning those
Okay.
rules, and then you try it with someone, or like writing or actually reading and listening.
I want to talk about more sort of a dilemma of I know that a lot of, especially younger people nowadays, they don't read as much, books, paper books or Kindle books. Is it possible for people to, in terms of input, you don't do a lot of reading, but just do a lot of listening? Do you think that if you don't do any reading, you're missing out on a lot of things, or is it not a big deal?
I think it It really depends on your goals again.
Mhm.
So if you're only aiming for basic speaking skills, then yes, it might be possible to learn a language just by listening. But the main issue is relying solely on listening is that you probably won't get enough practice noticing grammar and vocabulary forms. So, and again, research clearly shows how important noticing is. And so simply hearing the language without this awareness won't lead to meaningful learning. My students and so teachers often ask me if listening to music or watching movies can help them learn a language. And my answer is usually that it might help to some extent, but not only if you actually understand what you're hearing. If you don't understand, it's not very effective. And that's exactly why reading skills are so important because reading helps you better grasp the language, making your listening practice more meaningful and productive. So it's possible to heighten or improve your proficiency by listening alone, but not enough. That's
Right.
my answer.
Yeah, this has been really great, very informative. Thank you so much for this information. And for everyone listening to this, I'll put the link to the takeaways for this interview in the description. So thank you so much.
Thank you.